from their senior projects that they've worked on over the course of their class. And so we're going to be hearing today from Audra Joiner, Lauren Eng, Leah Skay, Georgia Riordan, and Allison Reynolds. And so first up, we'll be hearing from Audra Joiner. Audra likes creative nonfiction, stories about misunderstood women, movies that feature Tom Hanks, queer theory, and loud electronic music. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Audra Joiner. And I'd like to start off by saying that I'm going to be reading a piece titled Models Wanted, or excerpts from a piece titled Models Wanted, Dead or Alive, Evelyn McHale and the Voyeurism of the Most Beautiful Suicide. Please be warned, as the title suggests, this piece does talk about depictions of female suicide. So if that's a triggering issue for you, please feel free to step away. And other than that, I'll get started. The famous image is so jarring that it's almost difficult to comprehend exactly what you're looking at the first time you see it. A beautiful, well-dressed woman splayed out on a crumpled black surface that almost resembles an expensive silk or crushed velvet, her perfectly made-up lips parted, her gloved hand clasped delicately around the string of pearls that decorate her neck. The black and white shot appears romantic, like an ad for an expensive perfume or a high-end boutique. The photograph's beauty obscures its tragic nature. Upon further inspection, however, it becomes clear that despite the photo's beautiful composition, something about it is very, very wrong. The beautiful woman's pantyhose are shredded, twisted around her ankles like ropes tying them together. Her unpainted toes are bare, sticking out from the torn fabric. Her smart, once pressed skirt is now wrinkled, riding up around her waist. The bed on which she reclines comes into focus. It's not made of some delicate or ephemeral material, but rather a twisted mass of metal and glass that was once an expensive car. The sea of onlookers, their somber faces cut off by the car's hood, no longer seem to be looking in awe at a glamorous star, but rather appear to be staring in horror. It dawns on the viewer that this is not some full-page glamour ad in Vogue. Rather, it's the scene of a hideous tragedy, one hastily captured by an amateur photographer against the wishes of its subject. This photograph, often cited as the most famous suicide photograph of all time, has become a pop culture icon, one that's earned the nickname, quote, the most beautiful suicide, end quote. The woman's name is Evelyn McHale, and before she was the crumpled corpse on top of a shattered vehicle, she was a sister, a daughter, a fiance, a friend, and most importantly, an individual, one with plans, hobbies, a life. However, when her life was cut short by tragedy, the narrative that surrounded her did not simply stop. Rather, the image of her body that's become known as, quote, the most beautiful suicide, end quote, has lived on in the eyes of voyeurs who can't seem to look away. On April 30th, 1947, Evelyn took a train from New York City to Easton, PA to visit Barry. It's unclear exactly why she made this trip or what happened that day in Pennsylvania, although some speculate she was visiting for his 24th birthday, but it wasn't a long visit. The very next day, she took the train back from Easton to the city. She arrived at Penn Station sometime around 9 in the morning and traveled directly from there to the Governor Clinton Hotel across the street. Once there, she carefully and deliberately penned a note on the hotel's stationery. Quote, I don't want anyone in or out of my family to see any part of me. Could you destroy my body by cremation? I beg of you and my family, don't have any service for me or remembrance for me. My fiancé asked me to marry him in June. And this next part is crossed out. I don't think I would make a good wife for anybody. He is much better off without me. Tell my father I have too many of my mother's tendencies. At around 10:30 in the morning, Evelyn walked 2 blocks east to the Empire State Building, climbed to the 86th floor, neatly folded her tan, some reports say gray, coat, placed the black pocketbook containing her suicide note on top of it, and jumped. And so she was gone. The bookkeeper's name may have become just one on a list of victims of gravity, forever intertwined with the Empire State Building. Evelyn's final request would have been honored had it not been for a nearby photography student and sometimes cabbie by the name of Robert C. Wiles, who heard the commotion of Evelyn's plunge to earth and quickly followed the sound. Evelyn's body and the twisted wreckage of the limo lined up in his shot, he snapped a picture. Torn pantyhose, hands gripping pearls, makeup untouched, framed in crumpled black metal. No one had seen her suicide note yet. He had no way of knowing that in taking that photograph, he would go directly against her wishes. To him, it was simply a photo, the click of a camera, the sound of paid bills, and maybe a little extra cash in his wallet to take his girlfriend out for dinner. He had no way of knowing that publishing that photo was exactly what Evelyn was hoping wouldn't happen as she cleared the hurdles of the Empire State Building and careened towards Earth. The photograph was published 11 days later on May 12, 1947, as a picture of the week in Life magazine. And after it was published, there was no stopping it. The photograph was, for better or for worse, famous. Andy Warhol used the photograph in one of his prints titled Suicide, Fallen Body. It was just the first time Evelyn's image would become an icon, an indication of something. Recreations of her lifeless body would grace many an album cover or a music video. Artists like David Bowie, Radiohead, and even Taylor Swift have paid homage to Mikhail by lying spread eagle on the tops of luxury motor vehicles. The famous image of Mikhail's lifeless corpse is widely considered one of the most well-known of the 20th century. In 2014, journalist Ben Cosgrove coined the nickname "the most beautiful suicide" in a Time retrospective on the photograph. The name has since stuck with Evelyn and her likeness. One band, an English rockabilly group called the Carlos and the Banditos, even has a single with the same title. Although Evelyn's last wish, as she sat at that hotel bar writing her suicide note, was that no one see her body in death, it's clear that no matter how hard her family tried, no one could give her what she wanted. It seems that even the photographer knew that in taking that photograph, he'd made a mistake. Robert C. Wiles never published another photograph. The photograph itself is infamous. It's been shared countless times across dozens of social media platforms, often with a few scant write-ups repeating the most cursory of details. And that's just in the digital age. After the Warhol print, it wasn't uncommon to see posters of Evelyn's lifeless body splashed across the walls of dorm rooms everywhere. Needless to say, the photograph was captivating, but why? There's something attractive about a narrative with just enough detail to be compelling, but not enough detail to be painful, tragic, or difficult to deal with in any way. And of course, there's something about a woman who's beautifully tragic, a woman whose suffering has capitulated in a way that captures something fragile and complicated and dangerous and mysterious, something to be fixated on and obsessed over. Such a phenomenon is far from uncommon. Female suicide has captivated audiences since Ophelia drowned herself, contrasted by the flowers and vines that surround her bloated body. There is something about the anonymous suffering of a woman that allows people to speculate and imagine that the cause of her death was not the traditional affair, but rather something tear-streaked and star-crossed. A separation from a lover or a dramatic argument makes for a far more compelling entertainment than the plain and insufferable reality of genetic mental illness. When Wiles took that photograph, he was seeing the world through a male gaze, one which saw a body, not a person. Women's suffering is intriguing when it is concealed and covert rather than explicit, honest, painful. A similar trend exists within modern depictions of female suicides. In recent years, it's grown as explicit as a Vice photo series with the tongue-in-cheek title Last Words, which depicts a series of famous female authors known in part for their mental health issues reenacting their own suicides. Plath, of course, kneels in front of an oven. Woolf wades into a river with an enormous rock, a look of melancholy on her face. Perkins Gilman sits, patient and tearful, in front of some hideous yellow wallpaper. It's stunningly, impressively tasteless, the kind of thing you'd expect from an embittered teenager with a passion for photography and an art student with little respect for boundaries. The series, which was published in 2013, was quietly removed after it received backlash for, shockingly enough, the aestheticization and romanticization of female suicide. It's worth noting that all of the women depicted were white cisgender women. In fact, this seems to be a recurring theme across suicide-related media, to the extent that one might assume that the majority of suicides are white cisgender women. This isn't the case. Men are nearly 4 times more likely to commit suicides, and while the majority of suicides are statistically white, suicides are at an epidemic proportion in the indigenous community, with 21 for every 100,000 people. Most statistics don't account for transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, but there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that they are massively underserved when it comes to the risk of suicide. White cisgender women are far from the majority when it comes to suicide, yet time and time again, we see their suicides depicted artistically across different mediums. What is it about their dead bodies, lying in repose, that people cannot seem to tear their eyes away from? Why do people crave this specific form of violence so deeply? What we're seeing aren't their stories, it's their bodies. The argument shouldn't be that all parties should have their graphic, tragic, and painful suicides put on display for all the world to see. It should be that these women, all of these people, are victims of a tragedy who deserve privacy and respect rather than grotesque voyeurism. There are other means of remembering these women, of remembering their complexities and intricacies and lives, which don't include the gross, fixated examination of their corpses in repose. The priority should be on respecting these women and on preventing any further trauma or suffering. Evelyn would never receive her last wish, that her body, broken and crumpled, would never be seen by anyone, least of all her family. Perhaps she was afraid of the trauma it would cause them, or perhaps she was merely afraid of her battered body being their last memory of her. Either way, her corpse was violated on a massively unprecedented scale. This mistake cannot be undone. But what one can hope for is an honest understanding of the causes of such tragedies. Rather than turning their bodies into intricate exhibits, morbid monuments to tragedy, like paintings of sweet Ophelia floating downriver, what if we told the truth, that these women did not die suddenly, but over a series of months or even years, quietly or even loudly, begging for help? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Audra. That was very wonderful. Well, a wonderful reading, but the topic it's not fun. Next up, we have Lauren Eng's reading. Lauren is a senior writing major at IC. Her work ranges from memoirs about family and grief to long-form Asian fantasy. Lauren isn't feeling too well, so instead, Yuto Kuroki is going to be reading in her stead.
Hello, I'm Yuto. I'm going to be reading a bit of chapter 1 of Lauren's novel that she's been working on. Beyond the dim halo of the fading campfire, Shuyang sat on the gnarled roots of a towering tree to watch the corpses walk. She remained motionless, one hand gripping the hilt of her sword, the other thumbing through a string of charm knots, her breathing slow and deep to inhale as much of the pine-laced air as she could. The mountain breeze kept the reek of death from reaching her, but it was only a matter of time before they changed to fill her lungs with rot. 2 of the corpses stumbled, withered legs caught in an animal's burrow or a twist of roots. She swallowed, mouth dry, thumbnail digging into the looping charm that could bind a target should the occasion arise. Anything could trigger a puppet corpse to attack. But the rest of the bodies kept walking, leaving the dead where they lay struggling in the litter of decaying pine needles. These dead were the placid sort, still seeking to fulfill old oaths without being bound to the will of a puppeteer. She shivered, pulling her wool cloak tighter around herself, though she had dressed properly for the mid-autumn chill in layers of cotton and hemp. Either way, walking corpses were unnatural, the remnant of an improper death and burial, a failure of both the living and the dead. The sight of corpses left her palms clammy and shaking, regardless of if she spotted them in the secured empire's workshops or roaming in the kingdom's lands. If the corpses wander past her wards, we have more to worry about than a few decaying bodies, a mild voice said from above her. Shuyang stifled a startled yelp as a blanket was dropped on her head. As she sputtered and freed herself, her adoptive brother settled on the ground beside her. She balled the blanket up and hurled it at him, trying to calm her frayed nerves. In a voice steadier than she felt, she said, "You're supposed to be resting." I was. Wei Jia mussed her hair, dislodging the already messy dark strands from their makeshift bun. And then I woke and found you scared silly. I'm not, she sighed. It was futile to argue with the obvious, especially with him. It's not that bad. That grip on your sword says otherwise. He pried her fingers free of the hilt and replaced it with a paper twist of candied ginger. You know they won't harm us, even if the wards aren't there. I don't want to test that, she muttered, popping a piece of the candy into her mouth, the sharpness of the ginger bringing her mind back into focus. The slight glimmer of violet chi around the camp, her brother's life force and her woven charms, was beginning to fade as the dawn glow strengthened against the trees. The 8 knots she had tied and nailed into the trees the evening before had withered to plain gray cord, the last of their power draining away. Did you want to get moving? Her brother gazed at the corpses, his fingers loosening the bindings of the knife at his left wrist. We'll leave when they've passed. I doubt you want to remove the wards now. Definitely not, she agreed, her eyes still fixated on the wandering bodies. They had drawn even closer, though the mirroring effect of the wards seemed to be affecting them as much as the living. The pack parted around the edge of camp, like a flock of sheep fleeing a dog, their proximity tensing every muscle in her body. In the growing light, the features of the dead became more visible. Fading shadows played over life-drained flesh falling from muscle and bone, or illuminated bloated pockets where maggots spilled out to mark the path where the bodies walked. Sightless eye sockets were screened by limp clumps of hair, and the skin of the face had been chewed away to reveal stark white bone beneath. A hand covered her eyes. Stop looking, her brother scolded. Honestly, you should have woken me when you saw them. I could have taken over. I'm no longer a child asking you to rid my room of a mouse, she grumbled, shoving his hand away. I'm fine. You needed the rest anyways. It would be a little more difficult to scoop up a corpse in a bowl, he agreed, but I'd rather be awake so that you can have some peace of mind over sleeping while you're fear-frozen and unable to react to an intruder. Xu Yang hid a smile behind her hand, the image of her brother chasing the corpses with an oversized bowl easing her worries. It was good to be reunited with him. A solid year of posing as a sewing maid to spy on the affairs of a powerful weaver family had left her longing for company she could keep without disguises, without weighing every sentence before she spoke. Even though concealing her true self was as natural as breathing to her now, she at least didn't need to worry about being turned into a corpse puppet at the slightest slip-up if she was within kingdom borders. As the corpses passed the camp, making their way west to a destination unknown, she allowed herself to relax, easing the tension from her body in a few short stretches before rising to her feet to brush pine needles and dirt from her clothes. Her legs still ached from a week's worth of riding to meet Wei Jia at the river dividing empire from kingdom, then another week and a half of travel to be within a day's ride of the capital. She would be grateful for a proper bed and shelter once she was within its walls, even though spending any length of time in the city made her skin crawl. Freezing fingers pressed against her neck, sending her yelping away from her brother. He laughed, sidestepping her kick of retaliation with ease, and shooed her off. Go dismantle the wards. It'll be good practice for your exams. I can pack the camp. If we make good time, we'll reach the capital by noon. Eager to get back behind walls, she went to the first of the warding charms and pulled her jade talon from her belt, the blunted curve of the stone fitting comfortably in the palm of her hand. As she began working the point through the double binding knot at the base, she continued, or are you just eager to make it back to whoever you're seeing in bed before nightfall? From the choked-off intake of breath and the thump of rolled cloth hitting the ground behind her, he hadn't been expecting her question. Where did you hear that? Tian Chang sends me more than just my assignments. She gestured to her bicep, the strings of knot codes concealed beneath her clothing. Although we have to get creative with the designs when it comes to city gossip. I can't believe you two, he muttered, gathering up the bedrolls and stowing them in their traveling cart. You are on an important mission. You shouldn't have time to speculate about my personal life. Oh, please. My assignments range from posing as a sewing maid and gossiping with the other servants to roaming the mountains and speculating on the paths of armies. All my work is hearsay and rumors. And besides, why was I adopted into this family if not to irritate you? He snorted. Your contract says otherwise. Well, my contract also states that once I'm of age, I'm free to leave, yet I'm still here. I could have left 2 years ago. She combed the strands of the knot free, her fingers bumping over the waves in the cord as the end of the main charm component began to fall free. So are you going to tell me who? You'll get to figure that out yourself once we're back, he said dryly. I'm sure you and Tian Chang will have fun figuring out who it is. With a laugh, Xu Yang turned her attention fully on the wards, picking through the weave of strands with her jade talon to loosen them. The cheese-soaked silk threads warmed her fingers, although with the amount of time they'd been set, they had dwindled the power to almost nothing. Like most charms, the core of the work resembled a square the size of her fist. The shape rotated on a point with loops curling off the edges like the petals of an ornate chrysanthemum. She pulled the loosened weave apart and straightened the cord between her hands, coiling the now plain gray fibers over and under her elbow before moving on to the next point of the wards. Coil after coil of cord looped over her hands and arms until she felt more like a peg rack for embroidery threads than a person. For a single night beyond the safety of city walls, the amount of charm waste was excessive. While the used cording could be repurposed as plain rope and practice knotting, it was useless for reuse as proper charms. Once chi had been bled and drained through the fibers, they couldn't hold the same power again. But Wei Jia had always taken precautions when it came to traveling with her. The lengths he went to conceal her position and appearances equivalent to an assignment infiltrating the Empire's court. Every night he bled his chi into undyed silk cord, staining the strands deep violet before handing them off to her to tie the wards while he slept off the exhaustion. His efforts gave her peace of mind, but Xu Yang wished he could settle for lesser protections. It would certainly cut their camp-making time in half at the end of a hard day of travel. She tugged down the final point of the wards and bound the accumulated cords together before tossing them into the cart. The slight haze around the camp evaporated to nothing, leaving her feeling like a thick blanket had been stripped from her shoulders. She shivered, casting a glance around the forest surroundings, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. This close to the capital, it was rare to encounter even the most common of bandits. Her brother had finished packing and snuffed out the remains of the fire with handfuls of dirt. He had fixed his hair at some point, twisting the long, dark strands up into a proper topknot and binding it with a blue silk ribbon embroidered with his own needle. Shuyang hastened to join him, untethering her horse from where it had been picketed and checking her saddlebags. The wind shifted. She choked on her saliva as the stomach-churning scent of rot filled her nostrils, and she pressed the sleep to her mouth. It took several hasty swallows to quell the urge to vomit, and even then she tasted bile. Bent double, she pressed the ginger candy past tight lips and closed her eyes, trying to focus on anything but the smell. Her hands shook as she tried to finish checking her tack, adjusting buckles and ties until she was sure they were secure. Her head spun with how little she breathed, sipping in tiny mouthfuls of air, trying to avoid inhaling more of the stench. Her horse started to shift, sensing her fear, and she couldn't do anything to reassure it, her hands full enough with keeping her wits about her. Wei Jia swore under his breath, his words muffled by his hand. What is going? Shuyang made the mistake of looking up. Corpses surrounded them. The pack that had wandered past them had returned to circle the small clearing, milling about like vultures wheeling above a carcass. They reached with decaying arms, flesh fallen from bone to reveal bleached segments of skeleton. Her gaze flickered to the armor, barely clinging to the corpses' withered bodies, plain iron plates stitched together with faded cord, crumbling to pieces with rust and wear. She fixated on the insignia carved into the few remaining breastplates, a heron bowing before the bud of a lotus blossom, a symbol of the Fang family, adopted by the Azure army they had once commanded. She knew the design as well as the strokes of her own names, each elegant curve and petal, feather and petal, all coming together to first symbolize loyalty to the kingdom and its roots, now only standing as a reminder of betrayal. But these bodies shouldn't exist. Any soldiers from the traitor's army that had been capable of spinning qi were supposed to have been burned to ash, their bones smashed to dust to prevent them from continuing to serve beneath a regicidal general in death. The corpses closed in, separating her from her brother in a wall of decaying bodies. She drew her sword, struggling to pull the blade from the sheath with how much she was shaking. Another step and you'll lose your limbs, she warned, her voice trembling. Halt where you stand. A threat that pitiful wouldn't have worked on the living, let alone the dead. She remained frozen in place, mind racing in circles. They shouldn't exist, but they did. They shouldn't have fixated on her, but they were. She should be doing something, anything, but she wasn't. A corpse bumped up against the flat of her sword, and she couldn't make a move to attack it. Perhaps this was what she deserved. A glimmer of light wrapped around the corpse's arm and wrenched it away from her, detaching the limb and flinging it carelessly into the trees. Wei Jia landed beside her, a fistful of hastily spun qi strands in one hand fixed to the rope dart in his other. Twirling the weapon, he launched the dart through the air, weaving the point between bodies at his command until a violet net glittered across the ground. With a sharp tug, the trap pulled shut, dragging the feet out from under every corpse. Shuyang looked away from the scattered bodies, closing her eyes as her head spun. If she had been facing a living enemy, fighting would have been easy, a simple equation of act or be killed. But the wandering dead were simply an imprint of their past lives, their past betrayals. There was no thought behind their actions, only the ties that bound them to the world feeding their instincts. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Yuto, for the reading, and thank you, Lauren, for the writing. Now we will be hearing from Leah Skay. She is a graduating senior from Delaware, and she writes both nonfiction and fiction, having publications in Stillwater Magazine and Iron Horse Literary Review.
Thank you. Okay. I was debating whether I was going to read fiction or nonfiction, and it is right now that I'm deciding I'm reading fiction. So, this is going to be an excerpt from a long short story, and I'll just get going. Before the bottle is even in her hand, Opal formulates a plan to replace the 10 quarters she'll spend on it. The clerk must think she's plotting something the way she stares off at the wall, her back to the counter, numbers flashing behind her eyes as she calculates and recalculates. The lights from the lottery ticket machine distract her once, advertising buy big, win big in those red dot letters she really hates. But the coins jingle in her pocket and the scanner beeps from someone else buying something in line. It's only cranberry juice, Opal thinks. It's justifiable. Doesn't quell the guilt. The heavy lead coat weighed down by her pockets of coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. At least nickels and dimes have a glint to them, tucked into bus seats or sleeping at the bottom of fountains, forgotten but still little prizes when fingers retrieve them. Pennies are pointless. The sheer quantity required to be worth anything is inconvenient enough, but the cheap Greenwich copper is worth more than the coin itself. 1 cent. That's it. It costs 2 cents to make it in a press. -1 cent. Still, the cashier requests an odd number to cover tax, and on her $2 50-cent juice, so Opal pulls out a handful of coins from her pocket and starts counting. Didn't think anyone still used change, the cashier says, smiling. Most people use card or cash or just leave the change in the machine. Opal swipes the forgotten change from the dish behind the register on her way out. She emerges back out into the sidewalk, tucking her head away from the abusive summer sun. The sun never lets up. She can't imagine what it would be like to live somewhere with actual white sand blasting up a sunbeam into her eyes all the time. Like those pictures on travel websites or in commercials. There's no way that those girls with the perfect hair running down the beach to meet their lovers are wide-eyed and unbothered. Opal blinks a couple times, wiping the reactionary tears from her eyes before stepping off the curb without looking both ways. Cars wedge themselves into every parallel spot possible. Accidents happen all the time here. Prideful dads showing off their superior parking skill by squeezing their overstuffed minivans into compact car spaces. Drunken college kids scratching the sides of BMWs with shopping carts and duct tape mirrors. People blowing red lights at intersections. Kids dart across the street in squishy foam flip-flops, and Opal walks out just like them. The air smells like salt, frying grease, and insecurity. Opal squeezes between the hood of a red Beamer and the bumper of a gray sedan. She'd be pinned if either car moved, even an inch. She moves on. She flips her fingers around in her pockets, identifying the new coins by size. With the exchange that just occurred, she only needed to replace 8 quarters and 4 cents to remaining to the balance outweigh the loss. People leave their change everywhere. Most don't even notice it's gone. Worthless little coins, worthless little people. The beach on the other side of the boardwalk is crammed with umbrellas, fabric mushrooms awkwardly leaning from their odd sprouts that don't weigh into the sand. The shore is more towel than sand. More people, beached and sunburnt, tucking into cheap swimsuits and sheer cover-ups that cover absolutely nothing. Opal hates all of them. She thinks about renting a metal detector. She doesn't. Above the laughter and the seagulls, there's a blaring presence of techno music. That strange and grating electronic drone leaning heavily on shrill twangs, repetitive garage band sound effects, and a lot of bass. It gets louder as Opal heads back to her spot. You bought juice? Mackenzie says as Opal plops down on a pink beach towel. No, cocaine and lemonade. Opal can't see Mackenzie's eyes behind her sunglasses. The shade doesn't help. Their own askew umbrella hangs over the top third of Opal's towel and most of Mackenzie's, making a perfect little circle of tolerant comfort around them. She cracks open her cranberry juice. Cold bitterness is sweet. The music is coming from a group of boys next to them. A couple of abandoned chairs circled around a small trampoline with some foam balls, a cooler surely filled with alcohol that isn't supposed to be on the beach, and one guy sleeping face down in the sun with a penis painted in sunscreen on his back. He sleeps through the sounds, pretending to be music, blaring through the Bluetooth speaker wedged in the sand. Mackenzie leans up on her elbows, turning towards Opal. Her hair is braided down her back, tousled by the sea wind and the dip in the water. Her jaw sits awkwardly on a broken hinge, the light and an unmissable scar lining her sunny left cheek. Give me your phone, Mackenzie says. Opal reaches into her pocket and gives her phone over. Mackenzie types Opal's passcode with her nails clicking against the glass. Yours died? Yes. Did someone block you? Shut up, Mackenzie says, typing away on Opal's phone. The electronic music cuts off suddenly. Seagulls, crashing waves, boardwalk rides, and carnival games fell quiet in the absence. Was it relaxing or unnerving? I feel like those moments when Opal reads books in her backyard under the cherry tree that never grows cherries, and the world suddenly glitches out. No wind in the trees, no birds, no sign of life in the quietest moment on earth. From her position next to Mackenzie, Opal sees the blurry outline of YouTube before the video plays. Mackenzie puts on her own headphones just as the sound begins to rev. Opal, too, hopeful and unaware, doesn't follow suit until it's too late. At first, it has a hard time getting started, like a lawnmower that the neighborhood dad can't get to start. Thump, 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 thump. And then it's familiar. A rising siren sound reminiscent of an ambulance speeding by on the turnpike. It rises and falls at varying intervals, getting louder as each loop continues. The poor sleeping sap on the beach towel jolts awake, half dazed and glistening with the burnt flesh on his back. Opal flinches as the sound rises higher and higher, lying back on her towel and putting her jacket over her head to muffle some of the noise. The coins lay undisturbed on her thighs, perfect, burnt crop circles. The sound keeps rising, falling in predictable intervals like she expects from a siren, except that it just keeps going, eerily off tune and undulating with a mechanical drone unlike anything intentionally created. How dumb can they be? Opal asks from beneath her jacket. It smells like copper and dust and old fabric left out in the sun. It's suffocating. Mackenzie pulls it off and puts it under her head for her. Einstein's in Sharkflint, clearly, Mackenzie says back. The guy scrambles over to the speaker as his friends return from the surf. Opal recognizes a few of them, high school boys that spit on basketball courts. She knows all of their names. Roderick O'Malley, Jonathan Sherman, Trevor Trudy, some others. At night, they probably spend money on boardwalk games and eat way too much funnel cake when they're not bumming White Claws off the seniors in the woods. Uncomfortably average. Which one of you fuckers is fucking with me? Sternbert Sleeper shouts as he turns his attention away from the speaker. You come in and ask for, Rod says, chewing on some salt from the wave he ate. We ain't fucking with you. Dude, turn it off, Trevor says, diving down to snag the speaker from the sand. God, that is so loud. The speaker turns off with a pathetic beep, and silence erupts once more. I almost miss it, Mackenzie says quietly, dropping Opal's phone onto her exposed stomach and disrupting the coins piled on her body. Disappointing. Opal rises and restacks the coins. The anxiety quells as soon as she moves the stacks onto the blanket and off of her thighs. How would you do it? Mackenzie asks suddenly, her head resting inconspicuously to look over at the boys. Opal thinks. Quick and quiet. An artery. Never underestimate the swiftness of a good swing. Opal knows the sound of breaking bones, of bloody gargles, of swallowed teeth. She imagines the boys across from her lying there, choking on blood, and they're only quiet because they can't breathe. And then she stops, looks back at her bored and uninterested powder part, seeing the misshapen jawline twitch as Mackenzie flicks through her playlist. Opal counts the coins again and again, covered in sand and grime and sunscreen. She wishes she bought water. The juice is no longer justifiable. Opal remembers how big the hospital looked. Everything was so white. The walls, the floors, the lights, the windows, the people in coats, the people in beds. She stood outside a hospital's door, out of sight of the occupants. Cartoons played on the television inside. Nana went inside the room to talk first. Nana and Mackenzie's mother exchanged tight, uncomfortable pleasantries, calling each other Mrs. Kendall and Miss Murray, corrected to Miss Beauchamp because Nana's last name was not the same as Opal's. They'd only met over the fence and at the mailboxes before. No real names were shared. She gonna be okay? Nana started. She needs reconstructive surgery to repair the shattered mandible and at least 4 teeth removed. She'll need replacements or dentures for the rest of her life. Opal didn't mean to. Opal poked her head in, just barely. The grown-ups quieted, plastering on clay smiles. She walked in, head low, clutching a smudged piece of lined paper. She moved towards Mrs. Kendall first. Mackenzie's mother, an imposing woman with pretty blonde hair that Opal so hated, sat beside Mackenzie's hospital bed with a novel in her left hand and her phone in her right. I wrote an apology letter, Opal said, swallowing the knot in her throat. Should I read it to you? You didn't hurt me, sweetheart, Mrs. Kendall said, falsely calm. Read it to Mackenzie. Reluctantly, Opal faced Mackenzie, bandaged and swollen. Opal had a script to read from, one she'd been memorized during the hours of waiting in child services. The legalities of the situation were so extensive for a 9-year-old, But all Opal knew was that this was the beginning of the list of stuff to do to become a good person again, and it was to apologize. Just tell her you're sorry, Nana said, kneeling next to young Opal. Tell her you didn't mean to hurt her. Mackenzie was an empty shell. The paper gown was too big for her, crinkling with every little shift of her movement. Her hair sat in a loose bun on top of her head, keeping every flyaway away from the green-blue swelling on her left cheek. The stitches. Wiry black X-shaped whiskers. Mackenzie's left eye was shut and crusty from the constant tearing and swelling. She didn't even look human anymore, a monstrous changeling of a little girl. How much damage could one bat do? How much force could one little girl swing? Tell her you're sorry, Opal, Nana repeated. Just do it and we can go home. Let's give them some space, Mrs. McKendall said. Mackenzie, I'll be right here. Her voice was not sweet. The grown-ups backed away and stood by the door, pretending not to watch. Mackenzie lazily rolled her good eye over to look at Opal. There was no fear, no happiness, just the cold blue eye of a half-dead girl. It didn't matter where they were, either in the summer sun of Mackenzie's backyard or in the hospital. There was no light in Mackenzie's eyes. The unsettling violence of such an empty gaze made something in Opal's stomach turn. Dear Mackenzie, Opal began, flicking between Mackenzie and the paper. I am very sorry for hurting you. I was angry, and Mackenzie waved her hand, gesturing for something to write with. Opal didn't get it. Mackenzie rolled her one good eye and reached out of the bed, shifting all the equipment attached to her. Must have hurt. She snagged a pen and took the paper from Opal. She scribbled on the back and handed the paper back to Opal. You can make it up to me later. What does that mean? Opal asked. Mackenzie took the paper back. Nice girls are boring, so are the nurses. Bring something interesting next time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. Next, we're going to be hearing from Georgia Riordan. Georgia is a senior writing major with a double minor in English and art. She also serves on Stillwater staff as senior poetry editor and contest coordinator.
Okay, hi y'all. I am going to be reading an excerpt from my short horror story. It is called Shades, Shards, and Shatters. Kara emerged from the shower, glistening with humidity and the fresh smell of her lavender soap. She walked naked across the bathroom, heading towards the fogged mirror. She looked at it for a moment before swiping her hand across the glass. Her streaky reflection stared back. She tilted her chin, looking for the mole that she knew was there. It wasn't there. She turned her cheek to the side in case the spot from yesterday had burst. It wasn't there either, and no redness from the surrounding area hinted at its existence. Her new face wash was probably more effective than the last. That was all. A heavy knock came at the door. Hey, Kara, I need the bathroom. Kara frowned at herself in the mirror. We have another one by the kitchen. No, I need my shit that's in there. She sighed. Give me a minute. She reached for her towel from behind the door. As she did, the door started to swing open. Dude, no, she yelped. She yanked the towel back into place, crossing her arms across her chest. The fuck? Mark stared at her from the hallway before quickly covering his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I thought you opened the door. She took a deep breath. It's whatever. Just wait until I come out next time. You were in there for 45 minutes, he complained. Can you take shorter showers? She blinked at him. Are you tracking my shower times? No, of course not, he assured her. He laughed nervously. Why would you say something like that? Well, I doubt I actually took 45 minutes. I just don't want to pay more than my fair share on the water bill. That's it. Her mouth fell open in shock. Seriously? Yeah, he offered, sliding his hand from his eyes. He couldn't help himself from glancing at her barely covered body before looking back up at her expression. She lifted a brow. He coughed uncomfortably. Sorry. She rolled her eyes at him. I'll take care of the water bill. You need to pay for the cable, though, since you're the only one who uses it. He nodded, looking away. Okay. They stood there in silence, Mark looking everywhere but at Kara, and Kara glaring directly at him. She needed to dry off and change. Can you move so I can leave? She eventually sniped at him. He cast his gaze downwards and stepped aside. She quickly brushed by him, heading into her room and slamming the door behind her so hard that the mirror above her bed rattled. Kara did not start taking shorter showers. Out of spite, she started to run the shower for a good 15 minutes before she climbed in, and then let it keep running for another 10 minutes after the water was too cold. To add fuel to the fire, she started monopolizing the living room charger while she showered, as opposed to just bringing her own charger into the bathroom and letting it charge on the countertop. Mark truly didn't notice Kara's passive aggression until her cell phone went off while she was in the midst of another absurdly long shower. Her high-pitched ringtone, some sort of tune that came from a video game, certainly, rang through the living room, startling him. He stared at his phone in his little clear case. Kara, he called, and all he heard was the shower running in response. He shrugged. She'll get it when she gets out, I guess. The phone stopped ringing, and then immediately the ringtone played again. Mark frowned. Shouldn't they have left a voicemail? He got up to look at who was calling Kara. Stephanie, sister, flashed across the screen in little white letters. The phone stopped ringing again. He took a deep breath. Then it started ringing once more. Intrigued, Mark picked up the phone. Kara's phone, he said. This is Mark. Where's Kara? Snapped a feminine voice on the other end. She's in the shower. Sorry, I noticed you kept calling, so I just... Yeah, no, whatever. As long as you didn't murder her, she said, letting out a false laugh. Mark laughed with her, confused. Can you tell her that her prescription's filled? She's sick? Mark asked. He looked around the room, as if he can spot the illness in the air. Why didn't she tell me? No, sighed the sister, irritable. They're not for a physical illness. Is she crazy? No, idiot, she's depressed, and I'd appreciate it if you refrained from words like crazy when talking about Kara, she said firmly. Sorry, started Mark, fearing her reaction. But, she doesn't seem depressed. Not now, obviously, because I keep getting her meds refilled, explained the sister. Could be a conflict of interest or whatever, but when she's off them, she stops forgetting that she is real. Starts dissociating and all that. Thinks the world is a dream, nothing is real, yada, yada, yada. Sounds scary, he said, genuinely. I'm sure it is. That's why I need you to tell her I filled her prescription. Why not just leave a voicemail, he asked. The sister sighed again. She's never cleared it out. Too many old messages to leave new ones. She blames the depression for that shit, but I think she's just forgetful. Right, he agreed, not really knowing the correct answer. Well, okay then, I'll tell her. Thanks, Matt, she said. It's Mark, he insisted, but the other line was dead. As soon as the call ended, it seemed, Kara opened the door to the bathroom, letting out the mist of steam in her wake. She turned towards the living room and stopped, spotting Mark holding her phone. What are you doing? She asked slowly. Oh, your sister called. She said she filled your prescription. Kara's face darkened. That's not any of your business. She stormed towards him and grabbed the phone from his hand. It kinda is, Kara, he called as she stomped towards her room. She paused, back to him. We live together, you know. If you're struggling, I can help. Are you a therapist? She asked, not turning around. Well, no, I just meant like pick up more or something. Cook dinner for us, that kind of thing. She didn't look back at him. That's very kind of you, she said in a voice that suggested she didn't think it was kind at all. But I'll tell you if I need your help. Don't go sticking your nose into my business like that again. Fair, he muttered, and watched as she disappeared into her room. Kara's makeup brushes vanished from the bathroom counter a week later. It wasn't a big deal at first, and she had gotten into the habit of using a sponge blender instead. She noticed, however, that they were gone from the counter after Mark used the bathroom. Usually she wrote down when she moved things from their usual place, but there was no note in her phone about misplacing the makeup brushes. Hey, Mark, she started. He was on the couch, sprawled across all three of the cushions. The TV remote sat loosely in his grip, his fingers lazily pushing buttons to flip between channels. It took him a moment to realize he was being confronted. Yeah, he said, offering her a slight smile. This is going to sound dumb, but did you move my makeup brushes? He frowned and glanced at her. No, I didn't even know you did your makeup. Kara blinked at him. Huh? I didn't notice you did makeup. Or any of that. She gestured at her eyeliner. You've seen me without this before. He squinted at her. Huh, I guess so. Looks good. Thanks, she offered. She shook her head. Anyway, the brushes. I haven't seen them. She took a deep breath. Okay, cool. It's not like they've been on a cup on the counter since you've moved in. He shrugged. I don't know what to tell you. Mark turned back to the TV. Maybe you just moved them? There was something soft and understanding in his tone, but it just made Kara wrinkle his nose at him. She didn't know what she wanted to hear. Part of her felt ridiculous for accusing him right away. What could he possibly need the brushes for? So she texted her sister, Do you know why my roommate would take my brushes? To which her sister replied, No, Kara, I think you probably just forgot where you put them. Followed by a second text, Do you need another refill? And Kara, irritated, simply said, No, I'll go look for them. And such was the end of the incident, despite the makeup brushes refusing to make themselves known in the apartment. Kara just moved on, using her blending sponge as usual and pretending it wasn't as ordinary as it seemed, until her potted succulent disappeared from the console in the hallway. We have succulents, was all Mark had to say about it. Another text to her sister, another demeaning, Kara, are you sure you're taking your meds? Then it was her phone charger moved from the end table in her room to the hallway floor. He didn't even have the dignity to put it on the console. She stormed to his bedroom, furiously pounding on the door. Stop moving my shit, she shouted at him through the door. I don't know what you're talking about, he yelled back. She heard him lower the volume or whatever he was listening to and shuffle towards the door. What is it this time? Phone charger, she said, her arms crossed. Why was it on the floor in the hallway? You tell me, he said calmly. I have my own in my room and we share one in the living room. I don't touch yours. It was on my end table this morning. I couldn't find it, and then I just found it on the floor, not even on the console. Her words were laced with anger. Kara, he said gently, are you suggesting that I went into your room, took your phone charger, and then dropped it in the middle of the hallway? Isn't it more likely that you were moving and just dropped it? She stared at him. Don't fuck with me, she pleaded. If you're doing these things, just please don't. It's unkind. He said nothing. He just closed the door in her face. And I think that's all the time I have. So, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Georgia. Next, we're going to hear from Allison Reynolds. She is a senior writing student. She considers herself to be poetish, cares too much about astrology, and hopes to work in publishing someday.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be reading from my project, which was a poetry collection. Just before I get started, I want to give it a shout out to Jamie, because this wouldn't have been possible without her. She is amazing, and there aren't enough words to describe how amazing she is. Yeah, so I'm going to read 5 poems today, and the first one is called Conversations with Stuart. The mouse in our walls knows how to party. All night long, he squeaks his way around the house, doing God knows what while navigating his system of tunnels. We've named him Stuart. Before, he used to stay only in the walls of my room, scratching inside the wood planks that boxed us in. It was our nightly routine to listen to each other voice our furtive squeaks to the darkened walls. Now he runs circuits through the house, saying hello to everyone. We'd suspected for a while that he must have a friend scurrying through the walls. I saw them in the ceiling together, fluid and lazy against the thick glass of the kitchen light. He still runs around, the true homeowner in our equation, this time with his unnamed friend when the house settles into the kind of stillness broken only by the yelp of the neighbor's dog and the occasional rev of an engine. I'm glad he isn't alone anymore. Maybe he never was, but I should have talked to him more when I had the chance. So no more mouse poems. So sorry about that. Everyone should have a mouse poem, I think, but I'm going to go with something a little different this time. This is called What We Couldn't. We could have been invisible, chameleons, slipping into blues and grays as the rocks on the beach where we ate strawberries. Blue-gray as the stones lining the streets up the hill to the castle overlook, and the other hill to the museum where you ripped your pants. Climbing up the broken-down structure, an arena carved of stone, the relic of some exciting past, we could have faded to shadows, our voices against the dark-splashed corners of the alleys we roamed. We could have melted flat into bar counters or flitted away into the breeze, trying to drag us into gray air, And we tried. We could have, but we always had to land, and we did land, as much as we tried to turn blue like the coast. We never could have achieved that blue-gray, though we tried. So this next one has gone through a few different iterations, and I'm not good with titles, so I've changed it a couple of times, and currently I'm settling on Periphery, Vermont, August 2019. My cousins and I paraded down and up the aisles of bushes, ducking under branches heavy with fat blueberries, dropping handfuls into our baskets, pocketing others when we thought no one would notice. They were blue bombs to pelt one another with later, or the midnight indulgence we forgot to scavenge for after the campfire had been put out and the edibles lulled us to sleep. Come morning, the attic bedroom was still with our breaths, and Anthony in the yard early to practice yoga, and my uncle flipped wide pancakes, spotted with burst blueberries, the batter just this side of undercooked. We, the family, ate on the screened porch. With breakfast, I tossed a handful of the plump berries into my mouth. I couldn't have liked them any other way, me and my mother mourning quiet, while the others' voices rose over the slap of water on the shore, and children raced through the vegetable garden. Maybe too tentative in the wake of their brilliance, or maybe our throats too dry to rise above a whisper, a sound to melt into the chirp of cicadas. So when I said that titles are hard for me, I meant it. And this one I tried with a little bit of a longer title, and it's a little bit of a longer poem. So this is called The Family Composed of Fire and Air and Little Room for Rain. My mother, third in a line of sturdy women suspicious of storms, from gentle drizzle to electric tumults. What was she looking for when she married a meteorologist? Sturdy in his own way, the eldest son of a turbulent family, incompatible, unruffled by tornadoes, yet unprepared for the fallout. He's aloof and logical, yet driven by the crackle of something deep inside him, and maybe that's his Gemini sun talking, the stubborn edge of Leo ascendant, or the young standoffishness of his Aries moon, and I care a little too much about astrology, it's true. But my family, we are all air and fire, wind and lightning, and I am water for good measure, the rain to wash it all back. But I'm also crumbling earth and Capricorn moon, and God in his infinite dissatisfaction with furniture and astrological placements only knows where that came from. Not from my grandmother, a thing adapted to the climate of a family, acting as storm cellar and pulling all the doors shut behind her. A Sagittarius, fiery and just unpredictable. And I can't imagine my great-grandmother wasn't the same way, straight-backed, strong-willed, steady, and also a Sagittarius. Yet somehow the fear of that heat, the spark, the plasma drove her below ground level until the fear ran thin and trickled out of her progeny, until my mother, fire-blooded Leo as she is, could rub my shoulders with practiced hands while whisper-thin tears mapped my face as the rain did the windows. She corrected my father's easy explanation that storms were just science and nature and all things logical. At 4, I may have been afraid, but where was I to look for comfort? My wide eyes darting between them facts and fluffed words, with a mother's touch on my back and my father's voice in my ear, and me obscured by the fog, standing up straight as hair does when water molecules and lightning clouds collide, a positive charge, electric. So I've been reading a little bit faster than I intended to, but I have just one poem left. And thank you everyone in advance. This is called Poem with Paper Stars. A late, dry night passes with the blinking of my eyes to keep brittle eyelashes in movement, like wings of the silver butterfly I keep on a chain around my neck. A song plays from the corner. The fog in my head kicks up a feeling of reverence, a slight to the ticking clock on its shelf, an hour and some change too fast. In the afternoons, my hands ask for something to do to distract from their want of flight, so I cut strips of yellow paper to fold into stars. 7 on my desk in a clumsy pile, the others taped on my walls in patterns, Cancer, Cassiopeia, mimicking in the daylight the dull shine of the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the drywall, transporting the light of the Big Dipper of Orion from the ceiling of the sky to that of my bedroom, together with me before my body turns to sleep, their embrace warm but stiff, and in the morning I cut more paper for stars. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just, there we go. Thank you, everyone. That was really amazing. That was really, really, really good. I was completely drawn into every single reading. This is the end of our Saturday night Spring Rights Literary Festival. We've got more events tomorrow, and we have events next week, and we actually have writing workshops through November. So have a good night, everybody. If anybody wants to stay and turn off their mute and just chat for a little bit, that would be great. I'll stay on the call. Thank you, Adam, for organizing this. Anyone have any questions for any of the writers?
I just want to say thank you to all the writers. So you all did wonderful, and I'm so glad I got to hear all of it. And thank you, Robin. I'd also like to thank Barbara Adams and Eleanor Henderson, who are here tonight, for helping me look for everybody. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Adam, for being our intern this last semester. So will you be reading? Are you a rising senior?
Yeah, I'm a senior next semester.
So you'll be reading as part of this next year, probably.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, everybody, have a really good night, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.